All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we are going deep on server deployment and load balancing.
Ooh, sounds intense.
It is, but in a good way, I promise.
Okay, you have my attention. I have to admit, those terms always sounded kind of intimidating, like something only hardcore tech people need to know.
Right. But here's the thing. It actually affects all of us every single day. Think about it.
Okay.
Have you ever, tried to buy something online during a big sale and the website just crashes?
Yes. So frustrating.
That, my friend, that's where server deployment and load balancing come in,
Yeah.
or the lack thereof.
Okay. Starting to see why this is relevant now.
Exactly. And to help us break it all down, we're diving into an episode of Beyond the Code with Simba. You know Simba, right?
Of course. Love that guy. He always explains things so clearly.
Right. So Simba's episode is packed with insights, and he even shares some real-world examples from his own projects, which is awesome. Plus, we'll be chiming in with our own thoughts and experiences.
Love it. A collaborative deep dive.
You got it. So let's start with the basics. What exactly is server deployment, and why should we care? Simba describes it as finding the perfect home for your application so it can thrive and serve users effectively.
Makes sense. It's like you wouldn't just stick your app anywhere, right? You want to choose the right environment for it.
Totally. And there are different options from a single server to cloud providers like AWS, Azure, Google Cloud. Simba actually talks about using Azure via Microsoft Founders Hub, which I thought was really interesting. It's a more cost-effective way for startups to explore cloud options.
Oh, that's good to know, especially when you're just starting out and resources are tight.
Exactly. So you've got to balance cost, performance, and how much you think your app is going to grow.
Yeah, like choosing the right size house. You don't want to be cramped, but you also don't need a mansion if it's just you.
Perfect analogy. Now, let's imagine your app is up and running, things are going great, but suddenly the traffic starts pouring in. That's where the magic of load balancing kicks in. Think of it like a traffic cop, directing all those user requests to different servers so no single server gets overwhelmed, preventing those dreaded website crashes.
Oh, I see, like distributing the workload so everything runs smoothly.
Exactly. Load balancing is like the unsung hero of a good user experience. It's working behind the scenes to keep things running smoothly, even when the pressure's on. Simba actually uses a great example of an e-commerce site crashing during a flash sale because they didn't have proper load balancing.
Ouch. Yeah, I can see how that would be a disaster for a business. Lost sales, frustrated customers. Not good.
Not good at all. So we know we need load balancing, but what kind?
Right, because I'm guessing there's not just one type, is there?
You guessed it. Simba breaks down the three main categories: hardware, software, and cloud-based load balancers.
Okay, let's unpack those a bit. Starting with hardware. What are those all about?
Hardware load balancers are physical devices, so they're super powerful, but they also come with a hefty price tag. Not really the best option for startups, as Simba points out.
Yeah, that makes sense. Probably more for large companies with massive amounts of traffic.
Right. So what about software load balancers? They're applications that run on standard servers, so they're more cost-effective and flexible. Simba mentioned some popular ones like Ninjinx and Aproxy.
Nginx. I've heard of that. I think it's pretty popular for web servers.
It is. And then we have cloud load balancers, which are managed services provided by those cloud providers we talked about earlier,
Hmm.
like AWS Elastic Load Balancing or Azure Load Balancer.
Oh, so they're like built-in services within the cloud environment.
Exactly. And Simba is a big fan of cloud solutions because they scale automatically as your traffic grows.
So less manual tweaking and management needed. I like that. But I guess ultimately choosing the right type of load balancer depends on your specific needs and resources, right?
Absolutely. Your budget, your tech skills, and how much control you want over the whole setup. It's all about finding the right balance.
Balance. I like that. It seems like a recurring theme here.
It totally is. Now, let's talk about getting your app out into the world, which brings us to deployment strategies. Because getting your app up and running isn't a one-size-fits-all situation either.
Oh, interesting. So there are different ways to do it.
Yep. Simba highlights three main strategies: blue-green deployment, canary deployment, and rolling updates. Have you heard of these before?
Vaguely. I think I've come across those terms in articles but never really dug into what they actually mean.
Well, let's demystify them. Blue-green deployment is kind of like having a dress rehearsal before the big opening night.
A dress rehearsal. Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So, you have two identical environments, one live and one staging. You clean out the new version of your app in the staging environment, and once it's all good to go, you seamlessly switch all the traffic over.
Oh, I see. So it's like minimizing risk and making sure the transition is super smooth for users.
Exactly. And then we have Canary deployment, which is like dipping your toes in the water before jumping in head first.
Okay, that sounds cautious.
It is. You roll out the new version to a small percentage of users first, just to monitor performance and see if there are any issues before releasing it to everyone.
Smart move, especially if you have a large user base.
Right. And finally, we have rolling updates, which are all about minimizing downtime during updates. Instead of taking the whole app offline, you update servers one by one. Simba describes it as changing a tire on a moving car.
Whoa, that's a powerful visual. So it's all about keeping things running smoothly, even during updates. But these strategies sound pretty complex. Are there tools that help manage all of this?
You bet. Simba mentions some powerful tools like Docker, Kubernetes, and Ansible that can automate a lot of the deployment process.
Oh, automation. I love it. Less room for human error.
Exactly. Especially for large projects with complex deployments, these tools can be real lifesavers. Like Kubernetes, it's amazing for managing containerized applications and scaling them automatically based on traffic.
So it's like having a little robot army handling all the heavy lifting for you.
Pretty much. So we've talked about the theory, but let's get into some real-world examples. Simba shares some insights from his work on a project called Iris, which is all about querying sanctions lists. He starts with a single server, but as Iris gets more popular and traffic increases, he realizes he needs a more robust solution.
Uh-oh, sounds like it's time for load balancing.
You got it. Adding a load balancer was a game changer for Iris. It allowed the project to handle the growing number of requests without any performance issues, and most importantly, without crashing.
That's awesome. It really shows how crucial load balancing can be as your application scales.
Totally. But of course, no tech journey is without its challenges. Simba mentions running into an issue with session persistence.
Session persistence. Now, that's a term I haven't heard before. What's that all about?
Session persistence is all about making sure users stay connected to the same server throughout their session. So think about like online shopping carts, right?
Oh, yeah. You don't want to be adding things to your cart and then suddenly get bounced to a different server and lose everything.
Exactly. That would be a terrible user experience.
Totally.
Yeah.
So how do you solve that?
Well, there are solutions like sticky sessions, which basically glue a user to a specific server, or database-backed session storage, which keeps all that session data in a central database.
Clever.
Yeah.
So even when you run into these challenges, there are ways to work around them. This is all so insightful, but I'm thinking about our listeners who might be just starting out with server deployment. It can be a bit overwhelming. What advice does Simba have for beginners? Yeah, where do you even begin with all this?
Simba's got some great tips, and we'll dive into those right after the break.
Yeah.
So Simba's first piece of advice, and this is a good one, is to start small.
Start small, okay?
Yep, like don't try to do everything at once. Begin with a single cloud instance and then scale up as your app grows and you need more resources.
Yeah, that makes sense. Don't overcomplicate things right out of the gate.
Exactly. And another big one, automate, automate, automate.
Oh yeah, automation is key. Less manual work, fewer mistakes.
Totally. Simba really emphasizes using tools like GitHub Actions or Jenkins to automate your deployments. Saves you time, reduces errors, what's not to love.
Seriously, it's like having a little helper bot doing all the tedious tasks for you.
Love that analogy. And speaking of things we love, security. Simba stresses that this should be a top priority from day one.
Right, because a security breach can ruin everything. What does he suggest?
HTTPS, of course.
Ah.
Firewalls, keep those bad guys out. And always, always keep your servers updated with the latest security patches.
Solid advice. It's like locking your doors and windows and making sure your alarm system is up to date.
Exactly. You've got to protect your digital home just like you would your physical one.
Makes sense. So, start small, automate, prioritize security. Got it. Anything else for us beginners?
Well, Simba also reminds us that every application is unique. So what works for one app might not work for another.
Oh, right. There's no one-size-fits-all solution in this world.
Nope. Experimentation is key. Try out different configurations, different tools, and see what works best for your specific needs.
So it's all about finding that perfect balance between all these different factors.
You got it. Now, we've covered a lot of ground here, from server deployment to load balancing to deployment strategies. It's a lot to take in.
It is, but it's also fascinating. It's like we don't often think about all the complexity that goes on behind the scenes to make the apps and websites we use every day work so smoothly.
Right. But when you start to peel back the layers and understand how it all works, it's pretty amazing.
It is, and I think that's one of the key takeaways here. Even if you're not a developer, having even a basic understanding of these concepts gives you a whole new appreciation for the technology that powers our digital lives.
Totally agree. And what's really cool is that Simba doesn't just talk about the successes, he also shares some of the challenges he's faced along the way.
Oh yeah, like that session persistence issue he mentioned.
Exactly. And I think that's really valuable because it shows that even the experts run into problems. It's not always smooth sailing.
Right. It makes it more relatable. And it's reassuring to know that there are solutions out there, even when things get tricky.
Absolutely. So we've talked about the technical side, but what about the user experience? I mean, that's ultimately what it all boils down to, right?
Totally. You can have the most amazing server infrastructure in the world, but if your app is slow, clunky, or keeps crashing, users are going to be frustrated.
And they're going to go elsewhere.
Exactly. So while we may not see it directly, server deployment and load balancing play a huge role in shaping our online experiences. It's like the foundation of a house. If the foundation is weak, the whole house is at risk.
Love that analogy. And it's so true. A poorly designed server infrastructure can absolutely ruin the user experience.
No doubt about it. Which is why it's so important to invest in robust, reliable systems.
Right, and that's true for everyone, not just big companies. Even small businesses and startups need to think about this stuff from the start.
Yeah, especially as their apps grow and they start getting more traffic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And let's not forget about security. That's a big part of the user experience, too.
Absolutely. If users don't feel like their data is safe, they're not going to stick around.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So it seems like we've come full circle from understanding the technical aspects to appreciating the impact on the user experience. It's all connected.
Totally. And it's all important.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Any final thoughts before we wrap things up?
Well, just a huge thank you to Simba for sharing his knowledge and insights on Beyond the Code. It's been such an eye-opening deep dive.
Couldn't agree more. He's a fantastic resource for anyone who wants to learn more about this stuff.
And a great reminder that even seemingly complex topics can be broken down and understood with the right guidance.
Well, we've journeyed deep into the land of servers and load balancers and all that good stuff. Who knew it could be so much fun, right?
It's been a wild ride for sure. Tons of great information.
It is amazing, though, when you think about it, all this stuff happening behind the scenes to keep our favorite websites and apps running smoothly.
Seriously, all those complex processes working together so we can shop, bank, connect with friends, all without a hitch.
Right. And what really struck me was how Simba's journey with the Iris project really brought all these concepts to life.
Oh, absolutely. Starting small, hitting those roadblocks as traffic grew, and then realizing, okay, we need load balancing.
Classic tech journey right there. And those deployment strategies, so clever. Blue, green, Canary, rolling updates. It's like they've thought of everything to minimize disruptions and keep users happy.
I know, it's like a well-oiled machine.
Mhm.
And speaking of keeping things running smoothly, Simba's advice for beginners was spot on. Start small, automate what you can, and never ever skimp on security.
Golden rules for sure. And I love how he emphasized that there's no one-size-fits-all solution. You got to experiment, find what works best for your specific app and your own tech skills.
Exactly. It's all about finding that right balance, like we've been talking about. But the good news is there are tons of resources out there to help you figure it all out.
Absolutely. Tutorials, documentation, online communities. You don't have to go it alone. And don't forget about those free tiers offered by cloud providers. It's a great way to get some hands-on experience without breaking the bank.
So true. There's really no excuse not to dive in and start exploring. Even if you're not a developer, understanding these concepts can just make you a more informed tech user overall.
I totally agree. So big thanks to Simba for sharing his expertise on Beyond the Code, and to you all for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a blast. And remember, folks, keep learning, keep building, and who knows, maybe one day you'll be sharing your own tech journey on the podcast like this.
Until next time, stay curious.